Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the Relentless Geekery. How you doing, Al?
Very good. It's actually very weird to take a week off. You know what I mean? We are usually just bristling with things to talk about, and like 2 weeks is now too much. There's accumulation of stuff.
It was. I was like, oh yeah, good week off, and it worked well because I had so many things I was trying to do last week, so
Got
it
it.
worked well for me. So, how was your trip, your vacation?
It was really wonderful. You know, we just did a little getaway for 5 days. We went to the western part of New York State, so up to Rochester and down to Ithaca, right in the Finger Lakes area and stuff like that. And we really have had good times on vacations where we combine it with a certain amount of civilization, a certain amount of nature, and you know what I mean? Just kind of be on our own schedule. That's a real key thing. You know, we are both so constrained often with obligations schedule that we've taken on that it's really nice to just wake up and say, what do we want to do, as opposed to what can we fit in amongst obligations that we've already made.
Right.
So but and we can talk about, you know, highlights were things like we went to the Strong Museum of Play up in Rochester, which, you know, very much Relentless Geekery wise, such a wonderful place. It had the whole history of toys and games and dolls and puzzles and that kind of stuff, and in various different sections. So
Was it a museum you viewed and read little things, or was it interactive?
it was both of those things.
Nice.
Lots of display models, you know, like especially older games where they kind of like, if you touch them, they might crumble. You know, a game from the turn of the century, that is the 1900 turn of the century, as opposed to
Right.
2000. Um, they seem to be very well preserved, but just that, those so much not to play with. But yes, in terms of, they had a whole video game arcade, a whole pinball arcade, all kinds of uh, like hands-on things for the kids, a whole section
And
of
big kids.
and big kids, exactly. So, you know, so my biggest problem in that section wasn't so much can I play with the whack-a-moles and things. It's more like, can I crawl through this little opening to get to the magic slide that goes down to the next thing.
We
You know,
have a man stuck in aisle 7.
exactly that. You know, bring the fire hose, bring the de-wedging tools,
Right.
whatever else it might be.
See, now immediately my brain popped to, you're talking about these old toys, and my grandparents had some old toys and games, and my father had some when I was younger, and there might be a few roaming around. And this is another area that modern technology could really help this stuff, because think about it: VR goggles, you could see the toys, the board games, and spin them around. You can't physically touch them, but see them. But what about 3D printing? I mean, you could get the specs for those old whatever.
And recreate virtually everything.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's, you know, you're right. And some of that had occurred to me, like, you know, that any game that's out there could be recreated. And especially if it's not a matter of, well, we have to sell at least 10,000 copies to make it worthwhile. No, put the spec out there. I'm not sure exactly, you know, copyright isn't so much apply as trademark and various other intellectual property protections, but there have to be companies. They know they're not going to make any more money off of this. Why not put it in the public domain? And, you know, there are some things that are still ongoing. You know, Scrabble doesn't want to do that. Monopoly doesn't want to do that. They're still selling. But you and I must have played games in our youth. Like, I played a game called Careers that I used to really like, but I think that's long out of print, out of
Yeah.
manufacture. You know what I mean? So,
That didn't ring a bell.
yeah, and especially for not only 3D printing of little meeples and stuff like that, but all the cards, all the different kinds of monies. Somebody has to have kept that in the records, and it'd be really cool if there. And honestly, I haven't even looked. There might be a wonderful archive. You know what I mean? The Cabin of Lost Games or something like that.
That's
Where
a great name. I'm going to go get that domain right now.
see, exactly, and where people could do that. Especially, I'm not sure about this. It doesn't even have to be necessarily the original manufacturer. Anybody can do scans of their existing copy,
Yeah.
and you know what I mean.
Well, you would think, because there are certain things in the copyright for education. that if
Right.
it's, for an education purpose, you have a little more leeway at certain things, but you can't sell it. You can't. There's still things you can't do.
That's right.
I wonder if there's some certain things for artifact museum type something that they could recreate it to show in the museum, or how hard would it really be just to get the permissions? I mean,
That's right too.
what
You
would it
know.
really hurt? Heck, Parker Brothers, showing 50 years of Scrabble evolution would probably be beneficial. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh,
quick aside, I'm going, and then we'll jump back. I saw a meme that said, "Hey, look, it showed a Scrabble, all the pieces spilled out. It said, "Hey, look, I just bought a book from IKEA."
very good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Sorry. Go on.
No, it, one of the things is like a lot of games when they were created in the first place to help kids move into teenagehood and adulthood. You know what I mean? They weren't like just that. Something like life isn't only spin the spinner. It's like, well, you make some choices as to whether you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a professional, a
Right.
craftsman, that kind of stuff. And there's different rewards and different lucky accidents. And having kids gives you both benefits and obligations and stuff like that. So the reason, like you were saying, if there's an education exemption, and often when I do my talks, I kind of have that massive disclaimer at the end that says, of course, I don't own any of these copyrights, but it's being presented for educational entertainment purposes. So, please don't sue me. I want to talk about Spider-Man because there's things to be learned from Spider-Man that have nothing to do with my laying claim to him, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I think people are a little too touchy at times on that.
Sometimes, yeah.
But I mean, I understand. There's a lot going on with that publishing, people stealing books and stuff.
Yeah.
But
And
so
I most of the time I come up on the side of I want intellectual property to be protected. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, I don't know, there's all kinds of card games, and they're all some of them seem to be, wow, that's just like this other card game with a couple of words changed. And sometimes, like the Cards Against Humanity people were really wonderful about, they didn't mind there being crabs adjust humidity and all the other sets that are meant to, of course, evoke the rhythm of the name. And they went with the network effect. One of the things you get when you are in a place of easy duplication is you aren't so much worried about scarcity of the physical thing. You're worried about its presence in the population. And so the more that people become aware that a game called Cards Against Humanity exists, all the knockoffs actually kind of build your brand. They don't detract from your sales. Or there's got to be some nice little economics curve that says where you're saturated versus how much you're selling, and that you want to keep climbing that curve until you have such market penetration that everybody in the world knows about you. And then you have to worry about the knockoffs that are doing nothing but trying to steal your sales instead of
right,
building the universe of it.
yeah,
So,
it's
you know,
tricky. So
I
what was the coolest game or toy you saw in there?
well, boy, um, all kinds of things that I until you see it, you don't remember it from your youth. Um, Things like when they used to have not only erector sets and Lincoln logs, but all the variations on that, and not just Lego. Lego is probably the best known one. It's the ultimate, you can do anything with it game. And I grew up with, it wasn't you buy a set and that set of things is supposed to be, here's the Lego hotel, here's the Lego pirate ship.
Right,
It was you bought boxes of raw Legos of various different sizes and pieces. Maybe we've talked about this a little bit before. It was flats, it was slopes, but we used to get a big care package from Germany every year for Christmas, and the bounty of getting multiple different colors and just kind of adding to the collection, that now I can build a bigger skyscraper, but it's still however I want to design it. It's not make it look like Buckingham Palace or
right,
something like that.
right.
And so
Or
they
at
had,
least it's Buckingham Palace, but from scratch, you did it from your brain instead of put piece seven here and
yes, exactly. And the closer that you come, it's kind of like, wow, I took liberties with what it really looks like, but I kind of like my version better. You know
yeah.
what I mean? It's
Right. And we could probably go off on a really long rant with that about how kids are different and their thinking's different when you hand them a Lego set with instructions and then
that's
they build that one thing and put it on a shelf and leave it, as opposed to here's a million Legos, see what you can build with it, and the creativity it sparks.
exactly. I,
There's some,
I I really think there is something to that. That when you're just given a blank slate and you're trying to create kind of like analogs to the real world, it's very different than following instructions. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And if anything, they had all kinds of good stuff about play, about how important play is, that it's a way that someone can take a little bit step forward from where they are, take a little bit of risk, but it's not immediate penalty. There's not, you know what I mean? So all the different construction things. Like they had plasticant, they had all the different variations that were smaller sets of. It's kind of like Lincoln Logs, but not. And besides Lego, there was Duplo or whatever else
Yeah,
it might
yeah,
be.
the little
Um,
kids version.
just walking through the Toy Hall of Fame was all kinds of, yes, everybody must have had Monopoly, Slinky, and actually, if I remember right, a stick was in the Toy Hall of Fame because one of the first things you do as a kid is pick it up, poke the earth, cut the head off of a weed. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Now it's a sword. Now it's a
yeah,
exactly.
that's
Um, so that
and
was
and
kind of
and there's right along with that discussion. You got the kids, 60s, 70s go outside and play, and then midnight. Hey, you guys better come in and go to bed.
right when the
Whereas
lights came on. That's
yeah,
ours was,
2000. Hey, kids, go out and play. What do we do? There's nothing to do out there. It's a big difference.
right.
This is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the things that I've been working
Yeah,
with.
and they had, as you might imagine, all the various different generations of video games and stuff like that. So again, kind of interesting. You don't you I have seen all of them at one time or another, but you don't remember like before there was Nintendo or Sega, there really was Odyssey. There was, Magnavox had one that's hooked up only to their TVs and things like that. And so it to see all those various different generations and attempts, and that which was the one that finally had that right combination of it's cool but easy to set up. It has lots of games, but has the controllers they don't like get you free over here, and then the controllers cost too much money, and the controller breaks too easy. So parents hate that. It was very cool to see all the various different offshoots, if you will, and usually the ones that became the skillion sellers were kind of like the VHS compared to the Betamax. They were kind of more indestructible. They had more titles. They had a big thing about, sometimes you don't need a lot of titles, you need the one flagship title. So everybody wants to play Donkey Kong and then Super Mario Brothers, but then, and who's going to be able to match that? Well, they did with Crash Bandicoot. They found a recognizable, and the gameplay was good and everything. And so to see, they had lots of nice insights into the background of the people who did these things. They don't just spontaneously appear. Oftentimes there's a particular guy that created Tetris, that created, you know what I mean, like that. And here's the multiple from Japan, multiple from Russia, multiple from the United States. That the people that had that insight to at Mattel or Kenner, now some of these names have faded or been acquired, so they're not around anymore. But somebody had to say Barbie, and then Barbie plus her Playmates Ken, and and then all the different kinds of Barbies. They had a whole case with, Gladiator Barbie and Nurse Barbie and whatever else it might
Right.
be. And the fact that someone had that ability to keep thinking of variations that might be cool, they started to have all the various different skin tones so that everybody could find a Barbie that was like them, or various different dolls. You know, it.
The the did you that I mentioned that audiobook Console Wars about
Yes.
Sega. The guy that saved Sega before it got killed, Kalinsky, he came from reviving Barbie and GI Joe.
How
That's where
cool
he
is that?
came from.
Yeah. In fact, my watching that series of things was really good prep for going to the Strong Museum. Then I could actually, read the thing and say, yeah, I just read about that. I'd say to Colleen, part of not only this card, but here's a little bit more about those situations and stuff like that, that they actually had the tournaments, and they had, the 14-year-old boy was the best in the world at it was, I could add a little bit to the stories. um, they had, like I said, they had tokens, 4 for $1. So of course I had to play a little bit of pinball and a little bit, cards. And the video arcades were nowhere near comprehensive enough. I mean, I've played 100 different games. When I go to the Replay FX in Pittsburgh, one of the joys is just I always played like many others did. Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Missile Command, but I liked some of the more obscure ones like Make Tracks, or Berserk became Frenzy, and that kind of stuff. And it was that's I as opposed to the person that, okay, hon, I'm going to play Pac-Man. I know how to do all 26 levels or whatever. Come back in an hour. I didn't do any of that. I didn't feel the need to show off, if you will. It was just nice to know that there's still a cabinet, an operating, like, really nice, the knob feels just right cabinet, that someone has preserved it. And I know that there's not only this place, but there's museums and arcades out there now that they've got those people that are really good at understanding how it all works, keeping it clean, keep the gunk out and stuff like that. How cool that something from when I went away to college in '77, there's still a version of that game still out there for someone to play. And I think that a lot of the gameplay is still really good, that it's not just, people are now spoiled by various different games. They found really good combinations of the skill you needed and the ability to master the controller and just the gameplay itself of how you move up to various different levels and get rewards. Already then they knew how to make it addictive, and that hasn't changed because you get better level
It's
graphics. We've kind of talked about that. Sometimes
much more
playing a
refined
great
now.
game is still really satisfying, even if they only look like little different blobs on Space Invaders or something like that. It was fun. It was a ton of fun. um, it We went to the oldest mini golf course in the United States, operating
Yes.
since 1930. Isn't
Now,
that
did they
cool?
still have the same original set pieces?
That, so far as I could tell, yes, they seem to have refurbished it and kept it working and current, but they didn't demolish it and say, "Oh, we're tired of old '30s Mount Rushmore type stuff. Now we have spaceships." No, it really they seem to have maintained all that. Um, I don't know. It seemed old timey while still being very well maintained. And man, was it tough. You know what I mean? Compared to a putt putt course where it really is, there's lots of levels and slight slopes and stuff like that. There, almost every hole was at an angle on a little volcano where, like, when you shoot it, if you don't make it right in, it doesn't just like dribble to the side and now you have an easier putt. It rejects you and sends you away 2 or 3 feet, so you have another tough putt from a different angle. So we tied perfect for our anniversary. Yay, but we tied at 65. I'm usually in the 40s, on a 36 hole course, par twos and that kind of stuff. I'm usually twos and threes, occasionally a hole in one, and occasionally a six where I just can't seem to master it. But man, I can't tell you how many times I five putted that got close to the hole and then played this off again, over again, back again, rim the cup. It
Wow.
was hilarious after a while to be like, we play a lot and we're okay at this. We're pretty good. But man, this course is unforgiving. It's beautiful, but man, is it a devil of a course.
Nice. Well, that's
So
fun.
I don't know, that's something Colleen and I still love doing. It's a great equalizer, not only between her and I, but between all kinds of friends. Even if you're a mighty putter on a real golf course, that doesn't mean you've mastered the windmill of doom. That doesn't mean that you've got the timing and the angles and the weird little perturbations in the golf surface itself. Even if you bring your turbocharged, water cooled putter there, it doesn't mean you're going to just clear the field. So I love it.
I don't know. I wouldn't want to bring a new water cooled turbo putter to the oldest golf course around.
It
I
would
would
seem
need to get my old wooden one and fit in,
that's
put on
right.
a bowler cap, and
Yeah, yeah. I say, Ballywell, good
right,
shot, old chew. You
yeah.
know,
Ask Colleen to carry your club between the.
I have a friend that got me a putter because we played so much mini golf with like an orange handle, an orange wrap on the handle and stuff like that. And when I remember to bring it for a long time, I was just keeping it in the trunk of my car all the time. And then for some reason, I took it out. And now it's like behind the front door. I guess in case someone comes to the door and I need to
It's
like beat
Halloween
him off with
time.
my mighty putter or something.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of the ones at the courses are probably too small for you. You probably feel like you're holding little matchsticks.
I got to tell you, Colleen and I laugh about that all the time. We are, as you know, rodents of unusual size, to quote Princess Bride. And usually she has to get like the kids club in order to get a nice thing. And sometimes just that. At the end of the course, I have to go and kind of unkink the back because I've been playing hunchback the whole course because
Right,
it's just not tall enough for 6'3" Al to
right.
get an easy swing each time. And yet it's worth
That's fun.
it.
That's cool.
So and then again in brief, from there we went down to Ithaca, which is where Cornell University is, and I love college campuses. Ivy League's cool. It College campuses themselves, there's such energy, there's such wonderful youth and optimism and newness to the kids wandering around, and the buildings are beautiful. So many of them are done from like native stone, built into this church of learning, this beautiful edifice. So we walked all over the place. Chapel Hill, Cornell is interesting because it's built on gorges. It's not at all a flat surface like University of Illinois is. So we parked our car and then we're like 4 blocks up. We have to go up to get to the campus.
Wow.
And we climbed to waterfalls because they have so many gorges. They have lots of beautiful hikes to go on, waterfalls to see, and we did that as well. Like I said, the combination of nature and and civilization. But it's very fun then to go to the campus town. And what do they have in campus town? Geeky things for me. Here's the music store. Here's the bookstore. Here's the game store. That kind of
Right,
thing.
right.
So we played student for a while. And I don't know, we kept our masks on. It's very safe there. They have big signs of here's where the COVID testing centers are to make sure that you know be safe. Don't be a menace to other people. Get regularly tested. If you have any kind of symptoms, don't go to class. So very for college being reopened, and I think there's like 20,000 students there, maybe more. They seem to have found a way to have everybody in very conscious of don't be a menace. You know what I
Totally
mean? So,
different
yeah.
experience than what we had.
Exactly. It's like I don't know. They had a very cool thing. We happened to stumble onto it. They have a quad, and on the quad there was a whole bunch of booths that for all the various different service organizations. U of I had a similar thing called Quad Day, where all the different campus organizations would recruit for members. So that's how I found Star Course. When I was at U of I was in the student run organization that put on concerts. So that's how I got to be backstage and meet all my heroes and be backstage manager. So then I had really direct contact with them. And eventually I was senior manager. So I helped actually book shows. And so it's kind of it from that small thing. I was all in a thing called a group GASP, the group against smokers pollution. So we were one of the first groups that was trying to say, how about if we don't have inside smoking? And honestly, 77, that was nowhere near the cause that it is today. So just having said that, very cool to see that part of what you go away for school to is to expand your consciousness that these are perhaps causes worth supporting. And it was from what we could see of the signs, it was all the things you might imagine. It was how about some gun control and how about some awareness of ladies are people too, and you know what I mean. All those kinds of things. So I like seeing that evidence that it's not only I'm going to get my grades, I'm going to get my job, and I'm going to master the world. That already you're building that your contribution to the world will not only be can you get a house with a white picket fence. It's can you immerse yourself in the world enough to know that immigrants are having problems, and you know what I mean. We need to worry about
When
anyway.
Sarah was looking at Kent State, we
Hmm.
went and saw, went to the preliminary stuff, took a tour, and they're showing us they got this, and I'm like, oh my god, I want to go back to school. I like this the
Yeah.
stuff, yeah, you still got the learning, obviously, but all the other stuff is so cool nowadays. They have so many groups and activities, and
Yes.
just always something cool to do, and the food even they can actually go downtown Kent to almost any of the restaurants, use their flash
Right.
card, so
Yeah.
way different.
I used to love. I mean, U of I was 35,000 students or something like that, and so it could be very easy to get lost amongst that enormous crowd. But I found it fascinating to be able to say I can hit the computer lab, I can hit the library, I can hit the union where I can play pinball or video games or shoot some pool. There's every weekend there's a dozen different movies being offered by various different student organizations. I was never bored, and it kind of like the world in general. Man, if you're bored, it's not the world, it's your own doing. There is so much stuff to be found. If you just open up your daily newspaper and turn to those back pages and see, here's the comedy, here's the concerts, there's things to do.
Yeah,
I had a wonderful time in college. I really did all
yeah,
that
me too.
learning besides education. I got my 4 point and I got good grades and stuff like that, but I didn't do only that. I kind of made a big decision in sophomore year to say, I'm really getting great grades, but I'm kind of being a drudge about it. I kind of want to be a full human being, and U of I offers that opportunity. So my grades did indeed drop down a bit because you don't get all A's, you get B's if you decide that where you're going to spend some time is at Star Course. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah.
It's
And that's the thing. I mean, looking back, we're 30, 40 years out. Uh, in your life, when did it really matter that you had a 3.2 instead of a 4.0? Some of the kids get so uptight, ulcers and headaches, and I got to have a 4.0. Seriously, people go, oh, you graduated from there, and that's as far as it usually went in any interview. That
yeah,
you could have got C's, and I've said that. I'm like, your doctor has his diploma on the wall, but was he an A student or a C student? They both
right.
pass. You
You know
know,
what you call the guy with the lowest grade point? Doctor. You still call him doctor. Exactly.
yeah,
You know, it's just I am very happy. that some of the big life lessons that I learned were early in college when it didn't matter. The first time that I was really betrayed by somebody, blindsidedly betrayed, where it's like, I did not know that they had another agenda going on here, and that because now we diverge, I'm going to get ground up. I did not know that money matters, emotions matter, alliances are formed without you being part of it, kind of an early version of Survivor. I just, so many things that I found out to my detriment. Thank God it happened when I was just a pup
Yeah.
in college instead of being, and they did happen later in life. I've had my share of, business crap and stuff like that. But that early awareness of, okay, so what's really going on here? This seems too good to be true. And so it probably is.
Yeah.
Investigate a little further. Don't just take things on face value. And I don't think it made me hyper suspicious because I wasn't betrayed 1,000 times, but it's sure about relationships. When you're dating someone and then you see them with somebody else, it's like, I would never do that, but someone will. And so I just kind of have to be aware. And when we retract back from that, I wasn't an entirely good guy in college. I like to think of myself as always having been true blue. But when you're like young and hormonal and looking at your best and people are offering, it was any number of times like, I don't know that I'm proud of all the things that I did when I should have been
But
only, but it's also, you're only 17, 18, 19. I don't know that I was with always people that it really was that big of a thing to. Maybe they were doing it too. You know what I mean? I don't know that I totally didn't give in to temptation. Hopefully never to the point of I really hurt someone. And I think this is true. We've had all the conversations that went with that. It sure seemed like, oh, that's terrible, but we'll work with it, as opposed to, I didn't hurt anybody's life forever. I didn't
yeah,
crush
yeah,
anybody's
yeah.
dreams.
And
So,
and
but still,
there's an argument, and I've been doing this with the one talk. When your kids are young, that's when they need to make mistakes. That's when they need to learn life lessons, not when they're 25 or 30.
right.
And
Because then they have resilience. They have the
yeah,
ability to recover and the ability to forgive and be forgiven.
and to see how actions, consequences, and choices, and sometimes things just don't work out, or oh, you know, we're not helping our kids if they don't try at field day, but everybody gets a participation ribbon. Well, that doesn't give anybody incentive to try. Uh,
Yeah,
there's an argument there. And when you got kids going to a job interview, one job interview, and they break down in tears because they didn't get the job, well, there was something missing. They needed to not win that tournament. They needed to see loss. They needed, as you said, make mistakes and learn from that and grow.
exactly.
Some of the worst people, I think, never learn some of those
And
lessons.
I'll tell you, you also learn a lot about yourself. You know what I mean? So here I talk, hey, I read a lot of comic books. I'm all about nobility and heroics and so forth. And then the first time that you're like, if I just don't say something, it'll go easier, even though I know that the truth is something else. And all those little, what's life about? It's maybe making those little concessions that not everything is a battle, not everything is a field worth dying on. And I sure learned. So I I not only took my regular course load, I took lots of honors courses because I was just so curious and didn't sleep a lot and so forth. But then you start to get that triage idea of, wow, I love this honors course, but I'm spending so much time on getting a 1 hour A that I'm putting at risk a 3, 4 hour B or C. That how stupid. No matter how much you love this, do you really want to obsess over it to the detriment of other things? And so I had to learn how to, like, I don't know, in high school, I was a valedictorian. I really got A's in everything because things in high school were not beyond anything that I would take on. But having said that, you go to college and all of a sudden, like, there's a whole bunch of people that were all valedictorians just like you. And in fact, to embrace the stereotype, we had all kinds of Asian kids that if they didn't get straight A's, they kind of like went back home. They didn't get to stay here on their scholarship or in the States. And so all of a sudden, I was competing with the German majors in German and the chemistry majors in my chemistry classes as part of my engineering degree and all that kind of stuff. And it really was a wake up call to be like, wow, I got to work. I didn't really ever cruise, but the difference between, I don't know, getting the easy A and really applying yourself to write the perfect paper, to do the perfect chem lab, to do the perfect computer program. I'm a computer science guy. My mind has always worked well with that, and I did it as a hobby and for love. When I got to the rigor of real computer science at U of I, like the first CS course 121, I was blown away with how much I had to up my game. You know what I mean? It was learning new languages. It was learning new constructs. It was, you only had a certain amount of funny money to spend to solve it instead of, if I stay up late, I'll figure it out. No, you had to be efficient instead of like
Right.
dedicated. And boy, did I have to learn about myself
Yeah.
and what I had to do to do well in that new situation.
Arguably, and I know it's some culture things and pushing and all that, and some kids are like that, but arguably the ones who stressed out that much and were so dedicated that they didn't live a life, where does it end? I can't imagine they got done with college and got a job and they're like, well, now I can take it easy. No, it was the same thing. Well, I've got to work 13, 14-hour days. But, when they're 45, 50, what have they accomplished? They helped some company succeed, but they're still in the lab stressing. Where's the
A
life?
great way to put it. You know what I mean? That you have to like, what's the trade-off of how much time you're putting into something and who's really getting the reward? And if it's your grades, that's a good thing. I One of the other things I got from University of Illinois were any number of people found it very easy to be distracted by things that weren't school. So that all of a sudden cable TV was available and ESPN was on and sports. We had a guy that actually had to like take 1 or even 2 semesters off from U of I and go to the local community college to get his grades back up because he so much watched the indoor soccer draft, anything that was on ESPN. And I know I've done a course on Plato. Plato was the educational computer system at U of I. And I saw any number of people that, besides the educational aspects, they loved playing the games. The
Right.
first evidence of like internet addiction, where you're playing every single night and you actually got false IDs, so you could do that because U of I was smart and said, "Hey, don't wreck your career or your academic career over this." And yet, I saw people kind of crash and burn, and they're like, "19? You're fucking your life up at 19?" And yet, boy, the addictive qualities of those things, we've talked about this, they're perfectly designed to give you intermittent rewards and slight advantages that accumulate over time. And everything, there's like one more game, 1 more minute. I just can't turn away. Wow. When you see people, I laugh about this. They had like the phosphorescent tan, when you're going into a place that has a lot of VCRs and plasma panels and you're never getting daylight. After a while, you have this kind of odd sallow look, a little zombie-ish. And people did. They hid out during the day and they emerged at night. Oh well. I luckily, as much as I had an opportunity for that, I also was able to master myself to like say I did once a week play overnight. And like I don't know if I could do that now. You get to where if you do that the next day you're kind of cashed out. Back then I could do that and then go to classes. And yet I didn't do the 5 night a week, the 7 night a week thing.
Right. I
Thank
know
God,
lots of
because
people
there's
that
no way to
dropped.
sustain that. You get
Yeah.
an idea of what you're capable of and like what's your Achilles heel. This game is too good. I need to give it to myself as a treat instead of like do the work and then play this instead of play this instead of.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
I wish I was perfect about that. I know there's times when I was like, you come
Oh,
to after a 4 hour gaming session and you're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Damn it.
that,
It really
that,
is not
uh,
addictive.
so speaking of college, how's the college course going? The teaching at Baldwin Wallace.
Oh, really nice. And it ties into so I'm teaching a 6 week course at Baldwin Wallace for the Institute of Learning and Retirement. So it's adults as opposed to kids, but
So it's just a fun class. There's no credits or anything
that's
involved.
exactly right. It is enrichment as compared to education. It's not a big class. I have like 10 people in the room, but I'm going through 6 different. Like I'm doing the comic book history, and I'm doing things on archetypes and on geography and on movies, and so I have my session set up. I did my first session was a ridiculously compressed history of comic books from like 30 to 70, and then I was going to do 80 to date. Well, when I was on vacation and was intending on finishing that course off, every hotel I was in, it was much worse than my wonderful fiber to the house atmosphere at home. So I just couldn't stand the frustration of waiting for pictures to load, videos to load, that kind of stuff. I couldn't get it done. But luckily I have multiple other sessions in the can, having done them at previous Comic Cons or Mensa meetings or whatever else it might be. So I did one on geography, and actually it's very cool because not only do they have things in comic books, but when you mention Atlantis or famous things from Greco-Roman mythology, various mythologies from science fiction, a lot of people in the room weren't only having to be a comic book reader to get it. They understand that yes, there's the hollow Earth theory, and there are indeed adventures that take place by going in at the pole,
Right.
and poles, and so I'm really happy and lucky. My classes, I don't hold questions to the end. I want it to be interactive, and we have sometimes good chats, and then we digress, and I get back because I always have my outline running things
Really?
for me. And it's just, I don't know. So far, I've had very few people like go to their phone, very few people nod off. It's been a very nice interactive class. Some great questions, and some people that they read a lot when they were young. So it's a wonderful like nostalgia, and you can see sparks going off, and I remember that, and you know what I mean. So I'm having a great. It's only an hour, you know. Maybe I think I should go 80 minutes. I go an hour 20 each Thursday morning, and it zooms by while I'm doing it. I always have to. I'm not trying to pad anything. I'm more like the last few slides are always rushed. It's like, oh, we got a lot to get through before it's like. So I love it. I'm a pretty good speaker, and I really seem to have good command of my information. And no matter what question I've been asked, I've been able to give an answer or say, well, that's a great question. And here's the things about it, but I don't know if I have a perfect answer. So already I think the class likes me and knows that I have a lot to offer. And so they're giving me their attention. And in this era of, nanosecond level attention where everybody wants to be continually, not just a guy talking, but bombarded, my me and my slides and my stories so far seem to be enough. And maybe because they're also older people, I'm not trying to deal with 15-year-olds, which really have grown up in always check your phone, always check your phone. I'm not having to deal with that yet.
Right, right.
um, so I'm loving it. I'm loving all the accumulated knowledge that I've got. I'm getting a chance to share, and that is in itself satisfying. It shouldn't just be in here; it should be out to the world. You know what
Right.
I mean? So
Yeah, those type of classes are harder to come by and do now because I remember in the 90s I did a lot. I actually taught classes, group piano classes, and then I also taught different database classes using databases and basic commands and all that
yeah,
jazz. And neither of them were for credit or anything like that, but they seem a lot harder to find and get. Community rec centers don't run classes anymore. A lot of
yeah.
colleges dropped their continuing ed or extra classes, so
Right.
it's cool.
Lakewood, as a suburb, really still does have a very nice roster of all kinds of things: computer things, arts and crafts things, home economics, doing accounting, all those kinds of things. So I think that's one of the wonderful things about Lakewood is that it has that vitality that they really try to have that continuing education. Lakewood just got voted the top suburb around Cleveland in like Cleveland Scene magazine's best of 2021, and I think that's part of it is that it's still got vitality all through the layers of ages and stuff like that, not just school's only for kids or whatever else it might be.
Right,
So,
right.
so actually, you went on a cool conference that is very
Did.
much to your love and lots of learning down in Tennessee. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
Nashville.
Mhm.
I'm right outside of Nashville.
Okay.
So first of all, I'm not a big beer drinker, but I found the best beer I've ever had, and I will get some every time I go down there. So
Oh my! All right.
I I don't know what it was. Something about the flavor. It was Iron City down in Nashville. Uh, I
And
just
Iron City,
absolutely
not from Pittsburgh. That
yeah,
from
yeah. It
Oh,
was throwing
interesting.
me
Okay.
off.
Because
Um,
Birmingham is the only place I would have said could also be Iron City. You know what I mean? But
Right.
anyway,
Yeah, and I
okay.
didn't understand, but it was so good. I bought two big growlers to come home.
All
And we're
right.
going to New Orleans soon, and we're passing through Nashville.
So
So I'm
that'll be
like,
a reason to stop.
maybe we'll stop and I'll grab some more. It was really good. But the conference was a writers' conference by my friends Jay Thorne, Zach Bohannon. It almost didn't go on because it was postponed from last year.
And
And,
COVID concerns and things like that. But
yeah, it was really it was one of those with lots of speakers and you sit in the audience and listen type of conferences.
okay.
And there was supposed to be like close to 150 people. And then COVID hit. And so there was only about 30 of us there, but they streamed it, and the other 100 or so were listening streaming.
Semi participatory. Okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
they
Okay.
sent questions in and stuff. So it was very cool. Um, which is the modern norm almost. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people that do video to set up good streaming for conferences and things.
Okay.
And even with the ones like the Pulp Fest, for example, I know there's
Yes.
talks there. That's, oh, let's go to the Pulp Fest. But I could see things like that opening up to where you could get a ticket for $10 to watch all the streaming things go on if you live in California and can't come in. I see that as almost being expected. So
Exactly.
there's something coming there. But it was probably one of the best conferences I've been to. I've been to a lot of the paranormal ones with my son when he has talked. And
Okay.
there's always a speaker or two you don't want to listen to, and a couple you check out and you're like, oh, this is boring, and one or two good ones. This,
Okay. It's
every
often
single
why I sit in the middle in the back. So in case I have to like sneak out and go to another session, I'm
right,
not disruptive from the front row.
exactly. But this one, every session was wonderful. The whole room was just on fire. It was great. My special fun time was JD Barker was there, which I told you about. Uh,
Yes.
for everybody listening, he's a horror writer. He wrote the prequel to Dracula with Dacre Stoker, who's the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker.
Of Bram Stoker. Yes.
Yes, so very cool. I had breakfast with him 2 days in a row. So I mean, where else can you sit and JD has written 2 books or 3 books with James Patterson. So he's been on the New York and USA Best Time Sellers list, and
Yes. Yes.
sold millions of books. And I'm sitting having breakfast with him 2 days in a row.
Exactly. And just that wonderful conversation that it's not only a presentation, it's this you get to chat with them. You get to
Yeah.
know each other. And I know he's the guy that has been working with you, coaching
Yes.
you on writing and so forth. So I don't know if you've met him face to face before, but
No.
so what an opportunity
Yeah.
to be like finally the reality of
Yeah.
meet space face to face. All
Absolutely.
right.
And everything was really cool about it. It was fun. Didn't get really any time in the city. Kind of got down there and uh, had the conference and
Right.
pretty
Took
much
root in
left.
the hotel. Exactly.
Yeah. So didn't do so much. We've got New Orleans coming up. It's a writer weekend event world building weekend, totally different style of event. But we're going to
Okay.
be down there a little early and stay an extra couple days for Halloween celebrations in New Orleans.
Oh my! Of all the places, I think Burlington, Vermont, with its parade, there's certain cities that are known for taking Halloween on in a big way, and Nolans,
That,
of course, because of
yeah.
the costumery, the voodoo aspect, voodoo. That'll be a very cool place to
It,
be.
it
All
will.
right.
I'll have to take pictures. We'll have a
Yeah.
nice discussion on all the Halloween stuff because I've been there before, and I know like every shop, it's a cult and vampires, and of course, they're not saying we're really digging up vampire coffins and stuff. It's very
Right.
pop culture ish, but it's fun. Not to
Very
mention
cool.
they have Bubba Gump Shrimp Company
Right.
restaurants.
That you can, man. We had great eating when I was down there a couple of times. One for a tech conference, one for a Mensa conference. Every meal we had out was like, this is like the best gumbo I've ever had ever, and it's in every place along here. The best po' boy, the best, you know what I mean? It's
Yep, I can't wait. It'll be so. Oh man, the food's gonna kill me.
yeah. All right.
So,
So,
but let me one more thing with that, and I think you'll appreciate. So, I've been working on my middle grade fiction novels, fantasy. I'm doing study guides and teacher things for that, and I've been working on this talk on preparing kids for the future of work. And I haven't got that connection between the two. They seem like two separate sides, which has
okay.
not. I needed a final puzzle piece
Okay.
to connect them. And if I want to go to schools and do like a visit, I don't want to just walk in, to these fifth graders going, "Hi, I write a book. Let me tell you all about me." No, the
Right.
kids don't care unless you're Rick Riordan or J.K. Rowling. They don't care,
Right.
and or maybe R.L. Stein. Um, so I've been wanting something a little different with that, and it clicked while I was in Nashville, and I'm full steam ahead working on it. So
Fantastic.
I'm going to work on a book, a talk, things with kids to connect the two to writing stories for video games.
Interesting. Okay,
And
because they need the backstory to make the whole
yes,
world hang together, to make
and,
it make sense.
and not just
Okay.
the backstory, but the newer games that are a whole interactive story.
Okay.
Skyrim is even more so than that. It's an open world interactive story.
Right. Right.
So good writers are needed. And that's been my thing. I want to teach kids writing. Well, now I'm going to connect the two. So I can hold a workshop, for example, Space Invaders. We're going to work on story. Story has these parts, beginning, middle, end. You have to have a conflict. You have a resolution. Write a good story. What's the story of these aliens invading Earth and our force going to protect them? What story do you come up with? And then okay, pull out GDevelop or some other game making app. We're going to walk through game making concepts and creating the game that you wrote the story about. So connecting the two. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm like, nailed it. That's what I'm going to do. So
That sounds great. And honestly, for like another phase to your career, you know that there are places that they really want people just like you. They might have folks that are great at character development, but it's the graphics and the abilities of them, not necessarily their backstory. And people that are creating the world, they fantastic at creating castles and moors and whatever else it might be. But why is that land blighted? What happened in that battle? You know what I mean? It's that
yeah,
your ability to tie it all together, that could be a very interesting, like, you could offer yourself as that hired gun or be part of a development team that's creating a whole world. That's a very good way to contribute it with your skills and your
I
background
thought it
and
was
your love, your joy,
perfect.
you know? So
It's
yeah,
both things.
fantastic.
And I already found a guy that has worked on some big names. He worked on Skyrim. He worked on Star Wars 1313, which got canceled, and
Oh,
some other
okay.
big games
Yeah.
as a writer. And I just found him, sent him an email, and he's going to be on my podcast. So I've already like, okay, what questions can I pick his brain about? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then I figure if I do write a book, I might get him to do a foreword or something on it. So
Exactly.
moving on to this a lot. I love the
Yeah.
idea.
That's not, you know, one of the things that I've often had in my talks is it's not just burble all the information. There's always a little, so what have we learned slide at the end. And I really try to summarize in a way that here's why this is still important. Here's why it's what happened back then is cool and pertinent today. Pertinent, and often what I've also now tried to always include is, and so what do we do going forward? You know, you really should have a call to action, not just thanks for all the information and bye. So I often will say, you know, if you're looking for, so I just talked about Doc Savage, one of my heroes growing up, written in the pulp era, the 30s and 40s. And so, you know, here I am reading them in the 60s and 70s. And yes, in some ways they were corny, but in some ways, more ways, they were fascinating. The writer was really good at capturing that sense of time and place. And when you're going back, kind of like steampunk takes you back to the Victorian era, he took you back to here's post-depression United States. Science is pulling off miraculous things. We're finding out like how do antibiotics work? How does blacklight work? What does a jet do? And to be in that era of the explosion of science, and Doc being a science guy, kind of pushing on the edge of it, it was just enough science fiction-y. The world was still not fully mapped out, so all kinds of adventures could be, oh, here's another lost civilization. Here's something going on under the ocean because we haven't fully explored it. And so that joy of why should you read comic books? Because speculative fiction has always been great about creating that sense of time and place. And if you want to not just say what's going on in the world now, but kind of how did we get here and where are we going,
Right.
it's a perfect thing to spur your imagination and your appreciation for those kinds of things. So go to the library. The fact that in this world of digitization and collecting, that you can still, it used to be that you had to, like, if I was going to read Fantastic Four, I had to start collecting from number one in 1961 on and have gaps and all that. Nowadays, there's so much stuff that's available in the masterpiece and collected editions and current things that are being collected within a year of the story arc finishing. And the wealth of that being available is just a delight. And the more that you start to see how clever they were with a lot of that stuff hanging together, that it wasn't just individual titles, but whole universes. It mattered that when Atlantis attacked, well, there's seacoast everywhere. You know what I mean? I hope that some of what I'm doing is spurring people to not only say, yeah, those were fun. I like Richie Rich. I'm done with that now. That it's more, wow, it's literature. There's really cool things that have been going on here for a long time. And the fact that I can say, you know, well, underlying the X-Men has always been, it's about bigotry. It's about, you know, the fear of the other and how do we deal with people that are unlike us? And you know what? We're all unlike us. All of us have
Right.
different abilities and stuff. And so are we going to be tolerant or are we going to be jerks? And I don't know.
Well,
I've had all kinds of really nice, like, strokings of the chin and nodding when they're saying that really was a theme. It wasn't just biff bam pow. There have always been these things about, you know, the main themes that go on in comic books. So very
yeah,
cool.
and you look at something like The Boys on Amazon, which is based taken from a comic book. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't a movie.
That's
It
right.
it started as a comic book, and you can say comic book, but I think that's almost loaded. People think of Richie Rich and Archie and kids things.
Right.
I think a lot of people are using graphic novel now, or you know, um, uh, whatever graphic storytelling.
Right.
Whatever.
Sequential storytelling and stuff like that.
Yeah,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
and I know there's a big push. I know at the conference there's a big talk about serial fiction again. And you'd mentioned Doc Savage.
Right.
That was the era of serial fiction. Even A Christmas Carol from Dickens was serialized in the newspaper. Uh,
That's exactly right.
and there were it was just almost all of the Conan stuff was serialized, and Lovecraft was serialized. They put out a bit here, a bit there, and stuff.
Right.
Well,
Short
now,
stories, occasionally the novel or the novella. Exactly
yeah,
that. Yeah.
and now it's coming back, and things like manga. Manga is really a serial fiction storytelling medium with pictures, and we've got Amazon started this thing called Vella, which is for serial fiction. People are getting back into the whole serial fiction, and
Okay.
all comic books is serial fiction that hasn't gone away. But people are discovering now.
That's a great, honestly, I have for a long time, like people talk about, hey, Harry Potter, I read all 7 books. Good for you. There's 181 Doc Savages. There's like 625 shadows.
Oh my
The
god!
output that was done and the ongoing, like you can't help but comment on the issues of the day, the various different cities that you visit. You get such an incredible, and of course, all the characters and their story arcs, and that they do indeed go through triumph and tragedy together. And so, kind of like whatever makes us like soap operas and stuff like that, it's always been available in fiction if you look for it. You know what I mean? There wasn't only one Professor Challenger book from the Lost World. There was actually a series of them, but one sold the best. And so people think only that it was serialized in the way you're saying that Dickens was, or that a very, like Edgar Allan Poe came out as short stories, in magazines and then was collected into books. At least some of them were. And so it's I think that idea of, you have to keep it in your mind to be able to appreciate the next one. You have to be able to, there's depth to it beyond a single novel. And I've always loved that. That's why
Yeah,
I'm a fan of serial fiction in virtually everything. I've always loved my pulp heroes and my science fiction adventures. When you read the known space books, that there's different worlds, but they all tie together in terms of there's actually a chronology, and they give you a nice chart. When you read all the Terry Pratchett books of Discworld, man, it's very cool how he's been able to juggle and write things kind of out of time sequence, but make it all work together. And they actually have big charts of, if you want to read them in published order, here it is. If you want to read them in order in terms of chronology, here it is. If you want to dedicate to, these are the guards books, these are the witches books, these are, it's people love these things and actually do the analysis. The first time that someone reads the books and creates a map for the author of the world he's been creating, think of the love in that. Think of
yeah,
the encyclopedic knowledge that goes into, yeah, this has always made sense. You didn't realize that in order to go through this pass, there had to be a mountain range there, and that would indeed divide. And, the kingdoms, I love it. And sometimes they start with that. You know what I mean? They actually have that sense of world and they write to the world. But other times, I know that they just, like Robert E. Howard, he kind of winged it while he was doing the Conan books. But then you see the map of Aquilonia and all the
yeah.
different Kush, and it all is kind of like proto Europe bordering on Africa, but with some liberties taken. I just
Tolkien
love
Middle Earth.
a Middle Earth, absolutely. So it so Bella is a thing that Amazon has now, where it actually tracks more serial fiction. So
That's
because
all
I
it
had in
is.
my mind another one of those lost opportunities. I've been working on Knits next in the series
Right, right.
app for a long time, and I just didn't publish it and didn't get it out there because I know my vision was it wasn't only about me doing it. It was, hey, everybody who likes serial fiction, start filling in the data for me. I'll give you this wonderful series of templates and all that kind of stuff, so that you really can say, here's all these Shadows and Doc Savages and Harry
Right.
Potters and James Bonds and whatever. But that there's also then other book series. Dean Koontz often has interconnections between his books, even though the characters and things are very different. Stephen King has, they all take place in Maine in various different key cities. So there's something cool to be able to say, here's when this guy makes a reference to, what is it, the Needful Things shop and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
right.
It appears in these 4 books.
J.D.
You know what I
Barker
mean?
had the Needful Things shop and the proprietor in his first book, and King gave him permission to use it.
See, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Isn't that? I mean,
It, and it's called Amazon Vela, and it's new modern serial fiction. I know several authors writing on it, so about once a week they get a new episode out, and they're all short. I think the limit is like 5,000 words. You can't go over that for an
right.
episode, and they're very serial. We talked a lot about the structure of serial fiction, how it's different. You can't just take chapters from a novel. That's not what it's
You have to
like.
kind of have a little bit of a cliffhanger, a little bit of
Yeah,
conclusion. You have to, and if anything, I mean, in my mind, I've been around for 60 years. Anything that's been done serial fiction nowadays seems to have been almost like as an experiment, right? King did it with the Green Mile, and it
yeah,
was a big,
that's
ooh, let's go all watch what he's doing. And like, wow, how can he sustain that? Like I was saying, they had pulp authors that were writing a book every month, if not every 2 weeks, 80 to 100,000 words, and
right.
just boobada, boobada, boobada.
Lester
You know
Dent,
what I mean? How do you make your living when you're getting paid a penny a word? You
right?
churn out
Yeah,
novels.
lots
You
of
know what I
words.
mean? Exactly.
Let's see,
So
that's one big word, but I could break it apart into five smaller words.
and I guess there is that too. Maybe that's
Yeah,
why they all came across very Hemingway terse because they were getting paid per word, and the little
right.
words are just
So here's one of my prizes in my collection. Stephen King, when he started The Gunslinger, it was just some short stories in fantasy and science fiction.
okay.
I have 3 issues that have 3 of the original Gunslinger stories in it.
How
So
cool is
I love
that?
that. Not
Yeah,
signed yet. I'll work on that.
right, right. In fact, I have had any number of conversations over the years where people were like, "Man, I saw the Conan movie. That's really great." And it's like, well, that comes from books, and those books come from short stories, and so we go all the way back to like the 30s, and they're like, well, but it seems so modern. It's like, well, you set a story in a fantasy world, and it doesn't have to have modern things like trains and guns. It really can be, if you're sword fighting, kind of. So I've had any number of people that really had to kind of get enlightened as to the shadow existed before the Alec Baldwin movie. And if there's any number, especially now as we are digging into some of those older sources, you know what I mean? And sometimes it's not an original character, but when you go to see The Rocketeer, what does it do? It harkens back to those
Yeah.
science heroes of the 30s and stuff like that. It recaptures the pulps. I just read I went over to Lakewood Library for the first time in a while because I had kind of tapped them out. I had read virtually everything in their graphic novel.
Al, you gotta stop.
I know. It's like, because every time I'm walking out with like, a stack that I'm having to balance, like the Mr. Bean sketch. So, and so I discovered Adventure Man. It's done by Matt Fraction and the Dodsons,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
very much in the spirit of the pulps. And I just, the fact that it is like the pulps, it's fast moving, and it has, the villain is probably a little bit like Scooby Doo, revealed, not included early, but not revealed towards the end. And it is no wonder that I love those things because they push my buttons for good story, good characters, keeps moving. You know what I mean? When I'm sitting there reading, it's like, I'm glad that somebody is doing more of these instead of it being just the amber that we froze the pulps in from 90 years ago, 80 years ago. It's kind of cool. So,
Yeah, yeah. So, I wonder. I remember when Kindle first started, Amazon took a lot of public domain classic books, Treasure Island, H.G. Wells, and put them on Kindle for free. So that so when you first got there, it wasn't like 2 books. There was something there.
that's right.
I
Yeah.
wonder if they're going to do something similar with Bella. Get some of those old public domain serial fiction stories and release them because I'd love that. That'd be
Yeah.
awesome.
So I've heard about, that a lot of that was based on what was called Project Gutenberg.
Yes.
All kinds of books that had fallen into free use, public domain, were then typed in by various different enterprising. I've always loved the Count of Monte Cristo, and I'll make sure that it's available for everybody to use. And maybe it was like monks in a cloister that were like, I'm not allowed to talk, but I can type. You know what I mean? Who knows all the sources of this? But that quickly became tens of thousands of books. All kinds of what you were saying, not only old novels, but old scientifica, old various different things that you want to still be available instead of having to go find it, and it might not even be in the library anymore because it kind of got pushed out by new things always coming in. So there's all kinds of quality stuff from whenever you read like a book of the 100 greatest books of all time. Well, you do go back to the brothers Karamazov and various different Russian novelists and various different French and various different German, and like you're saying, that being available not only for novels But man, being if someone somewhere has the Street and Smith, there's various different big publishers of the pulps. If they have access to that and not even having to type it in like Gutenberg, if I know that Google was doing a whole big thing early in its career to be digitizing everything, right? They had the kind of the auto scanner going and stuff like that, and they actually had some court cases that they had to
Yeah,
settle with how much of this is making too much of it available and violating copyright.
right, right.
Um, I know that also is kind of weird. As much as we're saying, "Well, that's all out there, we should put it all in." The lawyers from Disney have been really good at saying, even if the story of Pocahontas has been around for a long time, if we make an animation with a particular likeness of Pocahontas, it restarts the clock. And they did that with Pocahontas and the Hunchback of Notre Dame and like Phileas Fogg and Around the World in 80 Days, either movie or animation. And so that's the Disney has all kinds of rights to the Little Mermaid, something from Hans Christian Andersen, hundreds of years old. But Ariel is now the Little
Right.
Mermaid, and so
And
they're going to fight you on it.
and I,
You
I
know?
I think honestly that those would be hard for them to really win in the end, because I know that has come up with Sherlock Holmes, that if you're going back to
Absolutely.
the source material and you're basing whatever you're doing on source material, you're fine, even though there's been a million movies and all that, and they can't. But I think that what the real world issue is that even if you would win and can say, look, I base mine off of Hans Christian Andersen's story. It's in the public domain, so I'm allowed to do that. The problem is Disney has a lot of lawyers and they
And a
have deep
lot of money
pockets.
and a lot of
So
time to keep
they would
throwing
just keep
lawsuits at
hammering you,
you.
even if they're ultimately going to lose, until you give up and then they win anyway.
Right.
So,
There's only certain big cases that have been decided where that serial, I don't want to use the word terrorism, that harassment of we know we're going to lose, but if we make it too expensive for you to continue, we do win. And they've actually now had a couple of cases where it was obvious that there was nothing to this case except you making it kind of like the intermittent wipers thing. You know what I mean? We're just going to outlast you. We're going to wear you down. And so a couple of those cases now have been set as precedents where people think they can fight the fight. I just read that for various different comic books, Steve Ditko, for instance, created Spider-Man along with Stan Lee and various other characters. And the heirs of Steve Ditko, unfortunately not Steve because he's now passed, they're fighting for, this really should revert to us, just like Captain America should revert to Jack Kirby and Joe Simon and various other, where it's very clear who the creators of various different characters that are now making billion-dollar movies. It'd be not just, if you will, up to the company's beneficence to give people some money, but to their legal rights to. If anybody has rights to the exploitation of this character, it's Bill Finger and Bob Kane for
right,
Batman, and
right,
we know
exactly.
it's William Moulton Marston for Wonder Woman. And I hope that some of those cases proceed because honestly, when you're making $1 billion and someone wants 100 million of that, that seems like a lot of money. But you got the other 900 million.
Right.
Like,
And I don't know the truth behind all of this, but I've heard that the original creators of some of the MCU characters,
okay,
they got a $5,000 check and was told go away, and that's it. They've used Iron Man in how many movies and made how much money because of that, and the
that's right.
original creator got $5,000, which
I've read similar things, and it really is, especially for those kind of characters where, like, it's I think it's Don Heck and Stan Lee did Iron Man, and Dan Abnett did the Guardians of the Galaxy, and Andy Lanning, and so that's the kind of thing where I guess they threw them a sop, and maybe compared to getting nothing, gameplay would say take whatever you're getting because otherwise it's zero, but the the justice of it would
yeah,
be that this thing wouldn't exist for you to exploit unless their brilliant minds, their creativity created this thing for you. And so you don't have to go halfies, but you have to go something that says, I don't know, maybe you do have to go halfies. Why should you start with my thinking that they shouldn't get it all? It really, you know what I mean?
I know we met Stephen Bissett in Maine. He was
Oh
one of the
boy.
big guys with Swamp Thing. He didn't create him, but he was one of the big ones that worked on
Yeah,
it.
for popularizing the character, exactly.
Yeah.
John
And
Copeland.
I know he said when the new series came out, he got a check. He didn't know the series was coming. They didn't ask him to consult or anything. He just got a check. And his attitude was like, yeah, I don't care. Whatever it could have been. Not that Swamp Thing has taken over the world or anything, but he
Right.
was just like, even 35 years later, I'm still getting, some checks from that.
Residuals, if you will. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a friend that has been a soap opera writer for a long time and has won Emmys and stuff like that. And she gets residuals like that. And even if you wouldn't know her name was associated with these shows necessarily, but that part of ASCAP BMI rights for music and what TV. I'm trying to think who administers that. They have been pretty good about. What we don't want is lawsuits. We don't want bad blood. We don't want any kind of thing that's going to stop people from just falling into these wonderful stories. And so there always has been enough money to share, and they found a way to do that. It's unfortunately comic books is one of the big places where so much of that work by contract was work for hire, and so people have been exploited for a long time. Frank Miller
Schuster
was
and
one of the first guys to say you can't do that to Jack Kirby. He created the Marvel universe. Why is he? I mean, he wasn't living in the hovel. I don't think that there's been some cases where they really were their life was not good and we could better it. But in most cases, it just was the divvy here is not fair. You know what I mean? If this person created something that has lasted 80 years as a character, that's something to be rewarded, to be revered.
Yeah.
And hopefully we're going to see
Well,
some more.
I've
Yeah.
said this, it used to be uh, they would buy a book, and this is a lot of the Stephen King stuff in the 80s. They'd buy one of his books and say, go away, and they'd make a movie, and we look at it and says, wow, that really sucked.
Yeah,
It
really.
just
That
wasn't
didn't have
that
any
good.
king in it.
Yeah.
Exactly. It had the
And
title.
and now we see a lot of times where the writer is like on the
Right.
shooting set.
Creative consultant right on
Yeah,
site.
and
Exactly.
working with the screenwriters. Now, I understand more now that there are just some things from books that don't translate well, or here's 3 chapters that we could take out because it doesn't move the story, and we can condense these characters into one. Yeah, I understand that I'm not always happy about it, but I think now that they're using the original authors more and understanding, we get a better product at the end.
I hope
So,
that that's the case.
yeah,
My cautionary tale about that is I know there's at least one Dune movie that had Frank Herbert consulting, and it wasn't any good. And it was especially in ways that were like, Frank, that's you wrecked your own good thing.
that's
It's not pronounced Fremen, it's Freeman. That's
yeah. Well,
what are you doing? And
We'll
giving
see what
water to the dead, crying on a desert world. What an incredible thing that was! How did you give that short shrift? That should have been a huge build and a huge scene. And you know what I mean? So even though he was there, he didn't seem to get the gist of his own books. I know
yeah.
that's a terrible thing to say, but
So,
oh well.
do you and Colleen at Christmas time ever watch any of the Hallmark Christmas show TV shows?
Honestly, probably not because they're
Okay,
kind of network and we don't do that. But
okay.
okay,
There's a lady on there that I call her the Hallmark Christmas lady.
okay,
She's redhead. Her name's Alicia Witt. She's like in at least one a year, if not two.
right.
And she was the little girl in the Dune movie from the 80s, the little sister.
Yeah, I am the Kvisat Harach. He is. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
She was spooky when she was 8.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So
I
that's
can't believe
my.
I remembered Kvisat Harach. Anyway, but it's all in there, man. It's
Well, the new one's coming. What, in a month and a half or something? So we'll see.
yeah. I'm
And I
really
love
looking
it.
forward to it.
I think they may. I'm giving it some hope because they're saying Dune, blah blah blah. I'm like, oh great, another 2-hour movie based on a 600-page book. How great. But they're like, no, this is part one. It only goes up to the first third of the book or so.
That's right. They're serializing it so they can do full credit to it. And in fact, it's not just Dune, it's Foundation. There's any number of what they used to call Watchmen kind of unfilmable things, but actually they're taking the time with
Yeah,
the writerly smarts and the special effects and whatever else it is. I hope to do it justice.
yeah.
You know what I
Well,
mean?
I'm like,
So
oh
I'll be
damn
happy
it,
to see that.
I do not want to subscribe to Apple TV. But we have been watching Chapelwaite on
Okay.
from based on Stephen King's short story Jerusalem's Lot. It
Okay.
has been fantastic.
I
It's
didn't know about that one. Chapelwaite?
Chapelwaite, yeah. Do you ever
Okay.
read the original story in Night Shift,
Yeah.
Jerusalem's Lot? 1850 in the house, and the guy's kind of going crazy. It's almost like Craftian in a way,
Okay.
with the worm, the cult of the worm.
Okay.
Um, well, that's what
Very
this.
Lovecraftian. I'm sure that it was an
Yes,
homage on Stephen King's part.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's very well done. They've redone it. So like the main character has a family instead of just being single. But it's this rich Gothic horror feel to it. It's 1850 and they've done so well with it. I've been absolutely
Wonderful.
loving it. So you should go grab your night shift and read Jerusalem's Lot and then see if you can.
See
It's
the
on
show.
Epix
Yep.
right now, but I'm guaranteeing it's going to come somewhere else once the season is over.
Got it.
It's
Thank you, because
just,
I didn't even know to look for that one. So,
yeah,
okay.
it's a
And
good one.
we won't get to it today, but as you know, we're segueing into October, and
Yes,
October is Halloween, and it's Horror Movie Mundo. So they
yes.
actually have, like, as you know, a nice conference right here in Ohio that is the best. I know that I've seen all kinds of most scary movies, best horror movies of all time, and that would be something worth delving into because
Yeah,
I look at this list and I've seen like half of them, and
I
wow,
want.
I kind of want. I don't want to watch them all at once because I don't want to like die in my own urine from being scared. But I kind of want to like dole them out to me so that I get a really good scare once a week between now and Halloween.
All right, well, that's got to be our topic first thing next week because I want to hear more about this. You said
Right,
they're
and
doing
talk
like a
about it early enough that we can do it, not just on the
yeah,
day before Halloween.
right,
Exactly.
right, yeah. Because we've been. I told you my friend Reese. He's watched over 1,200 horror movies and kept track of stuff. So I
Right.
want to hear about this more.
He's encyclopedic. See, that's very cool. I haven't watched 1200. I probably watched 200. When I was
Right.
young, I used to watch, like I said, on our sleepovers with me and Stu, we used to watch all the time the Screaming Yellow Theater and the Creature
Right.
Features. And so I've accumulated all kinds of terrible B movies, D
Oh
movies.
yeah.
But
Oh hey, real quick before we go, Children of the Corn, a Stephen King remake. I just
okay,
actually watched the '84 version, and
okay,
until the end, it wasn't too bad. The 2009 I thought was much better, but I saw that there was a Children of the Corn released last year, and it turns out it's a prequel where the children are starting to take over the town, but it
okay.
made a grand total of $1,200 worldwide.
Oh, man. So nobody wanted to see that bad boy, or the people
No,
who saw it early were like warning everyone off, zero
probably.
on Rotten Tomatoes.
1,200. I've
So,
never spent nothing ever that low. So, all right, man. So,
all right,
horror movies next week. There
very
we
good.
go. Talk to
Okay,
you
take
later.
care, Stephen. Always a pleasure. Bye
Bye.
bye.
You have been listening to the Relentless Geekery podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Steven's conversation on geek topics of the week.